This is a reading from The Mystical City of God, The Coronation by Venerable Mary of Agreda, Volume 4, Chapter 10. The favors which the Most Holy Mary conferred upon the apostles through the ministry of her angels. The salvation of a woman procured by Mary in the last hour, and what happened to others that damned themselves. 155. As the new law of grace continued to spread in Jerusalem, so the number of the faithful increased, and the new evangelical church was augmented day by day. Acts chapter 5, verse 14. In like manner did the solicitude and attention of its great queen and teacher Mary expand toward the new children engendered by the apostles through their preaching. As they were the foundation stones of the church on which the security of that building was to depend, the most prudent lady lavished especial care upon the apostolic college. Her heavenly solicitude augmented in proportion to the wrath of Lucifer against the followers of Christ, and especially against the apostles, as the ministers of eternal salvation to the other faithful. It will never be possible to describe or to estimate in this life the blessings and favors conferred by her upon the church and upon each of its mystical members. This happened especially in regard to the apostles and disciples, for, as has been revealed to me, not a day or hour has passed in which she did not work for them many wonders. I will relate in this chapter some of the events which are very instructive on account of the secrets of divine providence therein contained. From then we can form an estimate of the most vigilant charity and zeal of the Blessed Mary for souls. 156. All the apostles she loved and served with incredible affection and reverence, both on account of their great holiness and on account of their dignity as priests and ministers, preachers and founders of the gospel. During all their stay in Jerusalem, she attended upon them, counseled and directed them in the manner noted above. With the increase of the church, they were obliged to go outside of Jerusalem in order to baptize and admit to the faith many of the inhabitants of the neighboring places. But they always returned to the city, because they had purposely delayed separating from each other or leaving Jerusalem until they could receive orders to do so. From the Acts, we learned that St. Peter went to Lydda and Jaffa, where he raised Tabitha from the dead and performed other miracles, returning again to Jerusalem. Although St. Luke relates these excursions after speaking of the death of St. Stephen, of which I shall treat in the following chapter, yet during these events many were converted throughout Palestine, and it was necessary that the apostles go forth to preach to them and confirm them in the faith, always returning in order to give an account of their doings to their heavenly mistress. 157. During all their journeys and preachings, the common enemy of all sought to hinder the spread of the divine word or its fruit by rousing the unbelievers to many contradictions and altercations with the apostles and their listeners or converts, for it seemed to the infernal dragon more easy to assault them when he saw them removed and far from the protection of their mistress. So formidable the great queen of the angels appeared to the hellish hosts that in spite of the eminent holiness of the apostles, Lucifer imagined them disarmed and at his mercy, easily approachable to his temptations, as soon as they left the presence of Mary. The furious pride of this dragon, as is written in Job chapter 41, verse 18, esteems the toughest steel as weak straw, and the hardest bronze as a stick of rotten wood. He fears not the dart nor the sling, but he dreaded the protection of the most blessed Mary, and in tempting the apostles, he waited until they should have left her presence. 158. But her protection failed them not on that account, for the great lady from the watchtower of her exalted knowledge reached out in every direction. Like a most vigilant sentinel, she discovered the assaults of Lucifer and hastened to the relief of her sons and ministers of her Lord. When in her absence she could not speak to the apostles in any of their afflictions, she immediately sent her holy angels to their assistance, in order to encourage, forewarn, and console them, and sometimes sometimes also to drive away the assaulting demons. All this the celestial spirits executed promptly in compliance with the orders of their queen. At times they would do it secretly by inspirations and interior consolations. At others and more frequently they manifested themselves visibly, assuming most beautiful and refulgent bodies, and informing the apostles of what was proper for the occasion, or what had been ordered by their mistress. This happened very often on account of their purity and holiness, and on account of the necessity of favoring them with such an abundance of consolation and encouragement. In all their difficulties and labors, the most loving mother thus assisted them, besides offering up for them her continual prayers and thanksgiving. She was the strong woman whose domestics were sheltered by double garments, the mother of the family who supplied all with nourishment, and who by the labors of her hands planted the vineyard of the Lord. 159. With all the other faithful, she proportionately exhibited the same care, and although there were many converts in Jerusalem and in Palestine, she remembered them all in their necessities and tribulations, and she thought not only of the needs of their souls, but of those of the body. And many she cured of most grave sicknesses. Others, whom she knew were not to be cured miraculously, she visited and assisted in person. Of the poor, she took a still greater care with her own hand, administering to them food on their beds of sickness, and seeing to their being kept clean, as if she were the servant of all, infirm with the infirm. So great was the humility, the charity, and solicitude of the great Queen of the world, that she refused no service or lowliest ministry to the faithful, no matter how humble and insignificant the condition of those applying for her assistance. She filled each one with joy and consolation, and lightened all their labors. With those upon whom, on account of their absence, she would not personally attend, she assisted secretly through her holy angels, or by her prayers and petitions. 160. In an especial manner, her maternal kindness exhibited itself to those who were in the agony of death, for she attended many of the dying and would not leave them until they had secured their eternal salvation. For those who went to purgatory, she offered up most fervent prayers and performed some works of penance, such as prostrations in the form of a cross, genuflections, and other exercises by which she satisfied for their faults. Then she sent one of her angels in order to draw them from purgatory and present them to her Son in heaven as his own, and as the fruits of his blood and redemption. This happiness the Queen of Heaven procured to many souls during her stay upon earth. And as far as was made known to me, this favor is not denied in our days to those who during their earthly life dispose themselves properly for meriting her presence, as I have written in another place. But since it would be necessary to extend the scope of this history very much, if I were to describe how the most blessed Mary assisted many in the hour of death, I cannot dilate upon this matter. I will recount only one incident, in which she freed a girl from the jaws of the infernal dragon. It is the one which is so extraordinary and worthy of attention of us all that it would not be right to omit it in this history, or deprive ourselves of the lesson it contains. 161. Among the 5,000 who were first converted and who received baptism in Jerusalem, there was also a young girl of poor and humble parentage. This young woman, busying herself with her household duties, took ill, and for many days she dragged on in her sickness without improvement. As happens to many other souls, she on that account fell from her first fervor, and in her neglect committed some sins endangering her baptismal grace. Lucifer, who never relaxed in his thirst for the ruin of souls, approached this woman and attacked her with fiercest cruelty, being thus permitted by God to do so for his greater glory and that of his most blessed mother. The demon appeared to her in the form of another woman, and with much cajolery told her to withdraw from those people who were preaching the crucified, and not to believe anything they said, because it was all falsehood, that she should not follow this advice, and she would be punished by the priests and judges who had crucified the teacher of that new and counterfeit religion, whereas if she obeyed, she would live peacefully and free from danger. The girl answered, "I will do what thou sayest, but what shall I do in regard to that lady whom I have seen with these men and women, and who appears to be so kind and peaceful? I desire her good will very much." The demon replied, "This one whom thou mentionest is worse than all the rest, and her thou must shun before all. It is most important that thou withdraw from her snares." 162. Infested with this deadly poison of the ancient serpent, The soul of this simple dove was brought near to eternal death, and her body, instead of being relieved, dropped into more serious illness and was in danger of a premature end. One of the 72 disciples who visited the faithful was informed of the dangerous illness of the girl, for from her neighbors he heard that one of his sect living in that house was on the point of expiring. The disciple entered in order to visit her and encourage her according to her necessities. But the sick girl was so ensnared by the demons that she did not receive him or answer him one word. Although he zealously sought to exhort and instruct her, she, on the contrary, sought to hide and stop her ears in order not to hear him. From these signs the apostle saw the imminent peril of this soul, although he did not know the cause. Eagerly he hastened to report to the apostle St. John, who without delay visited the patient, admonishing her and speaking to her words of eternal life, if she would only listen. But she treated him in the same way as the disciple, obstinately resisting the efforts of both. The apostle saw many legions of devils surrounding the girl, and though they retired at his approach, they failed not immediately afterward to renew the illusion with which they had filled the unhappy girl. 163. Seeing her obstinacy, the apostle betook himself in great affliction to the most blessed Mary in order to ask for help. Immediately the great queen turned her interior vision upon the sick one, and she recognized the unhappy and dangerous condition in which the enemy had drawn that soul. The kind mother bewailed this simple sheep, thus deceived by the bloodthirsty infernal wolf, and prostrate upon the floor she prayed for her rescue. But the Lord answered not a word to the petition of his blessed mother, not because her petition was disagreeable to him, but for the contrary reason, and because he was pleased with her clamors, pretending deafness in order to hear them so much the longer. Also in order to teach us how great was the prudence and charity of our mother on these occasions. The Lord left her for this purpose to the common and ordinary state, without favoring her with a new inspiration in regard to what she was asking. She, however, did not cease on that account, nor did she permit her ardent charity to relax, for she knew that she was not to be wanting in her office as mother on account of the silence of the Lord, as long as she did not know expressly the divine will. Proceeding thus prudently, she dispatched one of her angels to bring aid to that soul by defending it against the devil, and exhorting it by holy inspirations to forsake his deceits and return to God. The holy angel fulfilled this commission with the speed in which they are wont to obey the Most High. But even though he made a diligent use of all his powers as an angel, he could not overcome the girl's obstinacy in clinging to her illusions. To such a state can a soul be reduced by delivering itself over to the devil. 164. The holy angel returned to his queen and said, "My mistress, I return from the task of assisting this girl in her mortal danger, as thou, the mother of mercy, hast imposed upon me. But her hardness of heart is such that she will not receive or listen to the holy inspirations I have given her. I have fought against the demons in her defense, but they resisted, standing on the rights which this soul has freely yielded and continues to yield to them. The power of divine justice has not cooperated with me as I desired in trying to fulfill thy will, and I cannot, O Lady, give thee the consolation thou expectest." The loving mother was much afflicted at this answer, but as she is the mother of love, of knowledge, and holy hope, she would not yield in what she had merited for all of us and what she teaches. Retiring once more to pray for the salvation of that erring soul, she prostrated herself upon the ground and said, "My Lord and God of mercy, behold, here this vile wormlet of the earth, chastise and afflict me, but let me not see this soul which was marked as one of the first fruits of thy blood, and is now deceived by this serpent, become the spoil of his malice and of his hatred against thy faithful." 165. The most blessed Mary continued for some time in this petition, but she received no answer from the Lord, in order that her invincible heart and her charity toward her neighbor might be put to the proof. The most prudent virgin bethought herself of what had happened to the prophet Eliseus, 4 Kings chapter 4, verse 34, who had vainly sent his staff with his servant Gizi to resuscitate the boy, and found out and found that he himself must touch and stretch himself over his body in order to restore him to life. Neither the angel nor the apostle were powerful enough to awaken from sin and from the stupor of Satan that unfortunate girl. Therefore the great lady resolved to go and heal her in person. This resolve she recommended to the Lord in her prayer, and although she received no answer, she considered that the work itself was a sufficient warranty to proceed. She arose, therefore, to leave her room and to walk with St. John to the dwelling of the sick woman, which was at some distance from the cenacle. But no sooner had she taken the first steps than the holy angels, at the command of the Lord, approached to bear her up on the way. As God had not manifested his intention, she asked them why they thus detained her, to which they answered, "There is no reason why we should consent to thy walking through the city, when we can bear thee along with great propriety." Immediately they placed her upon a throne of resplendent clouds, on which they bore her along and placed her in the sick room. The dying girl, being poor and now speechless, had been forsaken by all and was surrounded only by the demons, who waited to snatch off her soul. 166. But as soon as the Queen of Angels made her appearance, all the evil spirits vanished like flashes of lightning, and as if falling over each other in their dismay. The powerful queen commanded them to descend into hell and remain there until she should permit them to come forth, and this they were forced to do, without the least power of resistance. The kindest mother then approached the sick woman, and taking her by the hand and calling her by her name, spoke sweetest words of life. Instantly, a complete change came over the girl, and she began to breathe more freely and recover herself. Then she said to the heavenly Mary, "My Lady, a woman came to me who persuaded me to believe that the disciples of Jesus were deceiving me, and that I had better immediately separate myself from them and from thee, otherwise if I should accept their way of life, I should fall into great misfortune." The queen answered, "My daughter, she who seemed to thee a woman was thy enemy, the devil. I come in the name of the Most High to give thee eternal life. Return then to his true faith, which thou hast received, and confess him with all thy heart as thy God and Redeemer, who for thy salvation and that of all the world has died upon the cross. And adore and call upon him, and ask him for the pardon of thy sins." 167. "All this," the patient answered, "I have believed before, but they told me it was very bad, and that they would punish me if I should ever confess it." The heavenly teacher replied, "My friend, do not fear this deceit, but remember that the chastisement and pains which are really to be feared are those of hell, to which the demons wish to bring thee. Thou art now very near death, and thou canst avail thyself of the remedy I now offer thee. If thou wilt only believe me, and thou shalt thus free thyself of the eternal fire which threatens thee on account of thy mistake." Through this exhortation and the graces procured for this poor woman by Mary, she was moved to abundant tears of compunction, and implored the Blessed Lady further to assist her in this danger, declaring herself ready to obey all her commands. Then the loving mother made her openly profess her faith in Jesus Christ, and elicit an act of contrition in preparation for confession. At the same time, she sent for the apostles to administer the sacraments to her. The sick girl, repeating the acts of contrition and love, and invoking Jesus and Mary, who was directing her, happily expired in the arms of her protectress. The Blessed Mary had remained with her 2 hours in order to prevent the demons from again renewing their assaults. Her assistance was so effectual that she not only brought back the young woman to the path of eternal life, but delivered her soul from all guilt and punishment. She sent her immediately to heaven, accompanied by some of the 12 angels that bore on their breasts the sign of the redemption, and palms and crowns in their hands, as special guardians of the devotees of the great Queen. Of these angels I have spoken on a former occasion, and it is not necessary to describe them here. I will only remark that the heavenly Queen chose the angels for different offices in the service of men, in accordance with the graces and virtues of which they were possessed. 168. After the rescue of that soul, the rest of the angels brought back their queen, seated on the same cloud, to her oratory. She immediately humiliated herself, prostrating herself and adoring the Lord, and giving him thanks for having snatched that soul from the jaws of the infernal dragon. She composed thereon a hymn of praise in his honor. This wonder was brought by the wisdom of God in order that the angels, the saints of heaven, the apostles, and also the demons might know the resistless power of most holy Mary, and in order that they might learn that as she was the mistress of all, so not all of them together could equal her in power, that nothing would ever be denied to her prayers in favor of those who loved her, served her, or called upon her. For this fortunate girl, having loved this heavenly lady, secured salvation through her, while the demons, oppressed and confounded, were left in despair of ever prevailing against the power of Mary when exerted in favor of her clients. Other lessons might be drawn from this example, which I leave to the prudent meditation of the faithful. 169. The same blessing was not attained by two other converts who failed to merit the efficacious intercession of the Blessed Virgin, since their fate may serve as a lesson and as a warning, like that of Ananias and Sapphira, against the astuteness of Lucifer in tempting and ruining human souls. I shall relate it likewise as far as it was made known to me. May the instruction it conveys inculcate the fear of the just judgments of the Most High. Psalm 118 and 120. After the miracle just related, the demon was permitted to return with his host to the world in order to test the constancy of the faithful, for thus must the just and the predestined gain their crowns. He came forth filled with still greater wrath and began to seek entrance into the hearts of the faithful by searching out the evil inclinations of each one, as he does even now. For experience has given him confidence that we children of Adam usually follow our inclinations and passions more than the dictates of reason and of virtue. A multitude cannot be perfect in all its components, and as the church went on, increasing in number, so also the fervor of charity began to cool in some, thus affording a greater field for the sowing of his hellish cockle. Among the faithful, St. John found two who were beset with evil inclinations and habits before their conversion, and who sought favor in alliance with some of the Jewish princes in the hope of worldly gain and honor. Infected by this covetousness, which always was the root of all evils, they temporized with the powerful and flattered them in order to retain their friendship. 170. On account of these dealings, the demon judged them to be weak in their faith and virtue. He thought he might be able to pervert them through the influence of the Jewish priests, upon whom they depended. Following up his plot, the servant suggested to those priests many ways of reprehending and intimidating the two converts for having accepted the faith in Christ and received baptism. Yielding to the instigations of Satan, the priests pressed their threats with great show of authority and severity, as the anger of those in authority is apt to frighten weak subjects, such as these two, in their attachment to their own interests, happened to be. They proceeded from weakness to apostasy from the faith of Christ, in order not to incur the displeasure of those powerful Jews. They, moreover, still retained a certain unhappy and deceitful confidence in their patrons, and therefore soon dropped away from the gatherings and the other faithful, ceasing to attend the preaching and the other holy exercises of the converts, and thus making apparent their treasonable falling away. 171. The apostles were much aggrieved at the ruin of these converts, and at the scandal which would be occasioned by such a pernicious example in the beginnings of the church. They conferred among themselves whether they should notify the Blessed Mary of this event, but they hesitated to cause her this sorrow and pain. St. John told them that the great lady knew all the affairs of the church, and that therefore also this one could not have escaped her most vigilant attention and charity. Thereupon all went to give her an account of these two apostates, whom they had already exhorted and tried to lead back to the faith. The loving and prudent mother saw no occasion for hiding her sorrow at the threatened loss of souls already aggregated to the church. It was also proper that the apostles should learn from the sorrow of the great lady how they must esteem the children of the church, and with what zeal they were to preserve them in the faith and bring them to eternal life. Our queen returned immediately to her chamber, and prostrate on the floor as usual, she poured out a most fervent prayer for the two apostates, shedding copious and bloody tears. 172. In order to lessen somewhat her grief by the knowledge of his hidden judgments, the Lord answered, My spouse, chosen among all creatures, I wish thee to understand why my just decrees concerning these two souls for whom thou prayest, and concerning others who are to enter my church. These two who have apostatized from my true faith might do more harm than good among the other faithful if they continue their intercourse with them, for they have very depraved habits and have become still more hardened in their evil inclinations. Hence, in my infinite knowledge, I foresee that they will be reprobates, and that it will be better to separate them from the flock of the faithful and cut them off from the mystical body of the church. Thus they shall be prevented from infecting others by their contagion. It has already become necessary, my beloved one, that in conformity with my most high providence, both the predestined and the foreknown should join my church, some who by their sins shall incur damnation, and others who through my grace are to save themselves by good works. My teachings in my gospel are to be as the net which gathers in all kinds of fish, good and bad, the wise and the foolish, and the enemy is to sow his cockle among the pure grain of truth. Matthew chapter 13, verse 28, in order that the just may justify themselves so much the more, and the impure, if so they choose, in their malice, may defile themselves still more. 173. This was the answer given by the Lord to his prayer of the Most Holy Mary. At the same time, he renewed within her the participation in his knowledge, in order that she, perceiving the equity of the Most High and condemning those unworthy of his friendship and glory, might dilate her afflicted heart. But, as the Heavenly Mother alone held the measure of the sanctuary in her most eminent wisdom, knowledge, and charity, she alone also among all creatures estimated and pondered fully what it meant to lose God eternally, and to be condemned to eternal torments in the company of the demons. And so her sorrow was in proportion. We are aware that the angels and the saints of heaven who know this mystery in God cannot feel sorrow or pain, because that would be inappropriate to their happy state. If it would be compatible with their state of glory, their sorrow would be in proportion to the loss caused by the eternal perdition to those whom they love with perfect charity, and whom they desire to have with them in glory. 174. Hence, the sorrow and pain for the perdition of souls which was impossible to them, the Blessed Mary felt in a degree so much the greater as she exceeded them in wisdom and charity, for she was in the state of pilgrimage in which she could feel this pain. She was endowed with the knowledge of the blessed, by which she understood its cause, for when she enjoyed the beatific vision, she saw in the essence of God his love and infinite goodness for the salvation of men, together with the sorrow with which he would have for the perdition of souls, if such sorrow were possible. She knew the horrible character of the demons, their wrath against men, the terrors of the infernal torments, and of the endless company of the devils and the damned. As the Most Holy Mary saw that these two souls, and an almost infinite number of others in the church, were to draw upon themselves eternal damnation, what a sorrow, what pains and commiseration were caused in that tender, kind, and loving heart at these evils, and many others far beyond my power of describing. Many times did she lament such misfortunes and exclaim, "Is it possible that any soul of its own free will should ever deprive itself eternally of seeing the face of God, and should choose rather to look upon so many demons in hell?" 175. The secret of the reprobation of these first apostates the most prudent queen reserved to herself, without manifesting it to the apostles. But while she was thus retired in her affliction, St. John the Evangelist entered to visit her, and to inquire as to her wishes and how to serve her. When he saw her so afflicted and sorrowful, he was filled with consternation, and asked permission to speak, saying, "My Lady and Mother of my Lord Jesus Christ, since our Master died, I have never seen on thy countenance such grief and sorrow as now.
when thy face and thy eyes are bathed in tears of blood. Tell me, lady, if possible, the cause of this new affliction, and whether I can alleviate it at the cost of my life. The most blessed Mary answered, My son, weep now for this very reason. St. John conceived that the memory of the Passion had renewed in the loving mother this bitter grief, and under that impression he said, My lady, as thy Son and our Redeemer is now glorious and triumphant in heaven at the right hand of the Eternal Father, thou canst moderate thy tears. Although it is not just that we forget what he suffered for men, yet it is also right that we rejoice in the blessings following upon his passion and death. 176. She answered, It is also just that I weep when I see that after he died, some are seeking to crucify him anew by their sins and their apostasy, and by the abuse of the fruits of his precious blood. For I know that in his most ardent love for men, he has suffered for the salvation of each one in particular, whatever he suffered for all together. I see this immense love so little requited, and so many lost who should know him, that I cannot constrain my sorrow, nor continue to live unless the Lord preserves my life. O children of Adam, formed according to the image of my Son and Lord, what are you thinking of? Where is your judgment and your justification for thus incurring the calamity of losing God forever? St. John replied, My mother and mistress, if thy sorrow is occasioned by those two apostates, thou must know that among so many there must be unfaithful servants, for even in our apostolate itself was numbered Judas, a disciple in the school of our Redeemer and teacher. O John, answered the queen, if God himself wished the perdition of some souls, I should be able to restrain my sorrow. But though he permits the damnation of the reprobate, since they themselves seek it, this is not the absolute will of the divine goodness. He wishes all to attain salvation, if only they would not of their own free will resist. That not all should be predestined and gain the fruit of the blood shed for them has cost my son the sweating of blood. And if even now he could be aggrieved for a soul that damns itself, he would doubtlessly be more grieved than if he had again to suffer for it. Hence I, who know this truth, and am still living in the flesh, rightfully feel what my son desires to feel if it were possible. By these and other words of the Mother of Mercy, St. John was moved to tears and lamentations, in which he joined with her for a considerable time. Instructions which the Queen of Heaven, most blessed Mary, gave me. 177. My daughter, since in this chapter thou hast particularly learnt of the matchless and bitter sorrow with which I bewailed the perdition of souls, thou thyself must learn also what thou must do for the salvation of thy own and that of others, in order to imitate me in their perfection which I require of thee. No torment, nor death itself would I have refused, if such had been necessary to save any of the damned. And to save them I would have esteemed all sufferings a sweet alleviation in my most ardent charity. Hence, if thou dost not die of this kind of sorrow, thou art at least not excused from willingness to suffer all that the Lord sends thee for advancing in this cause, or from praying and laboring all in thy power to prevent any sin in thy neighbor. And when thou canst not all at once obtain thy object, or dost not know whether the Lord has heard thee, do not lose confidence, but enliven it, and persevere in thy efforts, for such a solicitude can never displease him who desires the salvation of all his redeemed more than thou. If, nevertheless, thou art not heard in thy prayers, make use of the means which prudence and charity require, and return anew to thy prayers. The Most High is always attracted by this sort of charity for the neighbor, and by the love which seeks to hinder sin. He desires not the death of the sinner, Ezekiel chapter 33, verse 11. And as thou hast written, he does not entertain an absolute and antecedent decree of damning his creatures, but seeks to save them all, if they do not pursue perdition of their own free will. Although he permits this in his justice as being inseparable from the free will of man, it is against his inclination. Do not restrict thyself in these petitions, and in those concerning temporal things, Pray that his holy will be done in all that is proper. 178. If I desire that thou labor with such fervor of charity for the salvation of thy brethren, consider that thou must do what thou must do to save thyself, and in what estimation thou must hold thy own soul, for which an infinite price was offered. I wish to admonish thee as a mother, that when temptations and passions incline thee toward the commission of any sin, no matter how small, remember the sorrows and the tears which the knowledge of the sins of men and the desire to prevent them has caused me. Do not cause the like in me, my dearest, for although I am now capable of that pain, yet thou deprivest me of the accidental joy of seeing thee, to whom I condescended to become a mother and teacher, really endowed with the perfection taught in my school. If thou art unfaithful in this, thou wilt frustrate my great desire of seeing thee please my divine Son, and accomplish his holy will in all its plenitude, by the infused light which thou receivest. Do thou ponder how great are any faults thou mayest commit, after being so favored and bound in duty to the Lord and to myself. Dangers and temptations will not be wanting to thee during the rest of thy earthly life, but in all of them remember my teaching, my sorrows, and my tears, and above all, what thou owest to my divine Son, who is so liberal toward thee in applying to thee the fruit of his blood, for the purpose of eliciting thy grateful correspondence.